need to introduce myself. So thank you, Prudence, for sharing who I am. Really keen to share one of Australia's pioneering projects that we were involved with. So it was, the design commenced on this one back in 2016, so it's 5 years ago now. It takes time to do these things, but it was one of the first few architect-designed certified passive house projects in Australia. So it really has become this case study, and we have received some recognition for that, which is great because we can share the love and explain how other people can then do that too, because some of the judges' juries were really saying that it did raise the bar for what's achievable in sustainable architecture, and we really want the rest of the Australian industry to raise up to this standard as well, because if we can do it, we figure everyone can. So I've got some challenges to share with you today, and the first one was around, these are the lessons that we learned along the way, and the first one's about not being afraid to push the envelope, and this was in terms of the site constraints, but also the building form and the design. So just really quickly, the map of where we are. Australia, south of the equator. We are down then in the warm temperate region, but we are considered a little bit cool temperate climate where we are. So it does get snow occasionally in winter, maybe once a year, so not a lot, but it still can get pretty cold. And in summer we get over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. It does get regularly quite hot. And the site we had was also in a bushfire prone area. It was a corner site that was quite large. There was woodlands to the south, and our solar access is to the north. So the challenges we had on this site was the fact that it was sloped from one side to the other on the diagonal. We weren't facing to our optimal solar orientation, and being such a large site, we didn't also want to just stick a little rectangular box in there, but really sort of spread out and have these outdoor rooms and outdoor garden spaces and connect to the landscape. So we did design this home as a solar passive design before we decided to turn it into or aim for certified passive house. So it is sort of stretched out. You'll see there's a lot of wall area. The interior, the central section is the living area with the 2-bedroom wings off to the side, and most of the services are grouped on the south in the middle, because our solar orientation is to the north. Our treated floor area, 170 square metres, which is about 550 square feet, if I've done my conversions correctly. So at the end of our sketch design process, we approached a number of builders, the client and I, and that's when we met Stuart Lee, who was a certified passive house builder and had already completed a couple of Australia's first projects. And we just collectively decided that he was the right guy to join the team, and that's when we got on board a certified passive house consultant to help us out with our calculations. Because at that stage, I hadn't undertaken that training, but was super keen to see if it was possible to make this house a certified passive house. And you'll see all that surface area meant that we have not the best form factor, which meant we needed higher insulation, and we have got triple glazing just to make it meet the standard, and it was achievable. So we definitely pushed the boundaries of our own understanding of what sustainable means. Coming from that solar passive background, we had to reduce the amount of glazing we had because we had too much, and we also had already chosen not to have any thermal mass in this project. The aim was to have less embodied energy, so there was the only concrete is the pad footings for the stumps, but the whole house is timber framed, so no thermal mass on the floor. And we did have an internal thermal mass brick wall, which we quickly scrapped because it wasn't actually going to give us much benefit. Coming from that solar passive design background, we wanted to make sure that our eaves worked perfectly, and they did for this diagram. And this diagram is perfect for summer at midday when the sun is shining on a particular angle, and winter at midday when the sun is shining on a particular angle. But it doesn't work for the equinoxes, and it doesn't work for those summer mornings and afternoons when the sun is in the east and the west. So our orientation meant that on the side here, these little wings or fins are actually very functional and they do work. But we then decided to put these external blinds on as well that are operable by remote control from the inside, and they work for all those other times of year. So that was a really big learning curve for us in terms of the Passivhaus performance and the internal comfort. So yeah, just some closer up pictures of what I've just explained about that. The learnings and the clients love these and have really got to understand how they work for their lifestyle, which I'll explain a bit more later. So lovely high ceilings throughout this living area, and then the kitchen and the rest of the house have got the lower flat ceilings. The windows was definitely a big learning curve, ensuring that we didn't overglaze and had that balance, put fixed windows where we didn't need them all to be openable, and they were all triple glazed imported from Europe, and they're lovely. Another shot of the inside. The corner windows out. So this is out to the south. So for us, that's where we're losing all our heat and not getting any solar gain. And in the bathroom, the clients ended up putting some film on the windows. So we had to go back and check our calculations again, because that then changed the performance. And until the garden grows, they needed some more privacy. With the build-up and the construction methodology, I'll talk about that with some construction details in a moment, but it was definitely a learning curve in how to do this as a timber framed project, trying to do the standard construction detailing, and this was the builder's suggestion, so we don't have a service cavity as such. All our airtight layer was outside the main frame and the insulation was external to that. So our standard kind of 2x4 frame became the service cavity, and we ended up with some extra insulation in here as well, but we did have to get the woofie analysis to ensure we didn't have too much on the inside of the airtightness layer. And our subfloor insulation got installed early on before any of the chipboard went down the substrate for the flooring, and it was sealed up, and it rained and got soggy and the builder had to drain it all out, and it dried out and it's all perfect now, but it was another learning for us all. We passed our blower door test with flying colours, and it was during construction that both me and my colleague decided to go and get our certified Passivhaus designer training and underway as well, because we were loving everything that we were learning along the way. So that leads us straight into the second challenge of not being afraid to push out of our comfort zone. So we really did extend ourselves to learn as much as we could, and absolutely embrace the generosity of the Passivhaus community. So we really did have to rethink how our standard construction details would work. So our typical wall is our standard sort of 90mm frame, which is around that 2x4 construction, is my understanding. And this is these details, I've got the blue as our airtight layer, and the red was our external weather resistant barrier there. Vapor permeable, of course. So that's a lot of what we're looking at with the standard detailing, which is quite a lot of insulation in the floor and quite a lot in the roof. It was the walls that were challenging, because we usually find there's always room to fit more in the roof. And with a timber frame floor, it was easy, but this is so much deeper than what is standard. But yeah, the walls, which I'll talk more about, that's where it gets tricky and more expensive in our climate. So in terms of us learning to speak this new building science lingo, we really did love it. And for all the data nuts out there, I hope this makes sense to you in terms of, I have translated the R values just so you understand what we're talking about. But essentially for our roof, we would double what the code requirement is, same with the walls. And in the floor, we actually don't have a requirement for that to be insulated at all. Most of the standard construction here in Australia, residential, is slab on ground. And in our climate, they do ask for slab edge insulation, but not necessarily underneath. But for Passivhaus, we absolutely are insulating our floor slabs or when it's timber framed. We really got to love using the PHPP and understanding what all these graphs meant. And it was really awesome to be working with a Passivhaus consultant. So for us, that was Luke Plowman, who's one of Australia's 3 certifiers. So it was really awesome to work with him and benefit from all his knowledge. So with the code here in Australia, we have a star rating system for houses, and 6 is sort of the standard you have to meet. By the time you get to sort of 7.5, that's almost double the performance of 6, which is great. It's really awesome to be aiming for that level, but it does not take into account air tightness. It's heavily focused on thermal mass. It excludes sort of laundries or wet areas, and single glazing is still allowed. There's all sorts of different things about how, like, it is based on building science, but it's not the same as Passivhaus. So we get this actual performance meeting predicted performance with PHPP, and that's what we love, because we can give that reassurance to our clients that they're going to get what it says they're going to get. And all the data is there for how we achieve this, and you can look it up on the Passivhaus database if you like. We are ID 5851. And for us, the collaboration of this project was one of the most successful things about it. We had excellent clients, a really great team of consultants. That's Stuart, our builder, who's from Enna House. He's changed his branding, but he's now one of Australia's most experienced Passivhaus builders, because that's all he's doing, and he's in high demand. And he was really great to work with, because we all had this common goal, shared communication, and there was no such thing as a problem, because it was all about that, solving only solutions and making sure that we all had that open communication and trust and respect. So it was a really great working relationship. So that global Passivhaus community is what we love, and what we love about what you guys are doing with the Accelerator, because learning from each other has been the best thing. We really feel like we've found our tribe here in Australia. Love learning from what everyone else is doing as well. Okay, so challenge 3 was about not being afraid to push your expectations. And this is, again, in 2 different parts. One is about the client's expectations and that post-occupancy evaluation and feedback from their perspective. And then also about the expectations of what a Passivhaus is, and will that solve the climate emergency? Is that as good as we can do, or do we need to be considering more? So these are our lovely clients, David and Yvonne, and this was their recent feedback about the benefits. They've been in the house a couple of years now. So, of course, all the things about Passivhaus in terms of comfort and humidity control and less energy use. They love that there's hardly any dust or bugs now getting inside, and that it feels quiet and solid. They do have a lot of sticky beaks coming past because this project received a lot of attention. People do knock on the door at times, but please don't go and do that without checking first if you're in the neighbourhood. For them, it did become a bit of a Faraday cage because of the amount of insulation, but it's okay. They've got good Wi-Fi now, and that's all sorted. But what they've realised too is there's a sense of dissonance and a disconnect from the outside, because if they're inside and nice and comfortable and they're looking outside, as soon as they step out, they realise that the weather outside could be quite different to inside, which is not the case of what they were used to and what a lot of our homes are like here, where often the outside temperature is kind of similar to what's inside. And for them too, David works from home, so he does really love this sense of active ownership. So not everyone likes that, but for him, it's the same as you would, open and close your curtains at the start or end of the day. And so he's sort of doing the same thing with those external blinds. And he does check all the weather and the data to allow for that. So here's the snow that did happen. Well, it happened last year as well, but it was the year before. And the interesting thing about this was all the neighbours' houses that were built in the subdivision, the snow on their roofs didn't settle. It melted straight away because they didn't have very well insulated roofs. Whereas here, it actually did settle and stay there for quite a few hours. And by the time it then didn't all make its way down to the gutters, they all bent because they weren't used to carrying the weight so much snow and water. So we did fix that and get some brackets to sort that all out, but it's just not a problem we would normally come across in Australia. But it does make for a nice photo in the snow. And so that was some data from that day. Our clients do love collecting all the temperature data from inside. So you can see down there the outside temperature we've got down to freezing just before, overnight before 6 a.m. But inside it did remain comfortable. It did dip down a little bit lower than than, you know, comfortable, but it's still that lovely range, whereas most houses would be probably quite uncomfortable. And again, our clients select all this, and this data was really helping them to understand what this house, how it was going to perform, what they needed to do, because the heating and cooling that they have is a split system, air conditioning, reverse cycle unit, the heat pump, and they didn't, I believe last summer, they didn't use it at all, maybe once. We did have a summer that didn't get too hot. And in winter, I think it goes on for an hour or two before they wake up in the morning to heat, just to take that edge off, and then it turns off and they don't need it. So if there's a beautiful sunny day, they do open up all those blinds, but sometimes they've discovered that it could get too hot. So the honey I bottled the dog Yvonne was home on her own, and she locked the dog in one of the front rooms, which receives all the sun, accidentally. And then she came home at the end of the day. Poor dog ran out sweating and parched, desperately needing a drink, because it did get up to 30 degrees Celsius. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what that is. Quite hot for inside. And they realised that it really could spike to that temperature without any active heating at all, purely based on the solar gang coming in. So on those days, if they know it's going to be quite hot, they leave the doors open or potentially close some of those blinds, even in winter. So that was in winter. And when they were out of the house for a couple of weeks on holiday, it did drop down to quite cool, just because there wasn't that internal heat gain for them. And they did have all those external blinds closed for privacy. So it's been really interesting hearing their feedback. And David watches all the data because he likes to sort of know what's going on, but that's him. And most of those early adopters in Australia absolutely have been the data geeks who really love this, but that's definitely been shifting to now being all about everyone understanding and appreciating the healthy home and the comfort, not just the data. Yeah, they love that they have this sort of evidence now about how that HRV works, and all the dust and bugs that's excluded from the home. And when we had bushfire seasons as well, that they weren't close to any fires recently, thankfully, but there was some smoke that came nearby, and their house performed really well compared to the other homes in the neighbourhood. They love that the condensation happens on the outside of the windows, not inside, which is often the case here. And their little hoist clothes rack there in the laundry means everything dries really quickly. The clients are super proud of what's been achieved. They love that their house is admired. But really also that our collaborative process was envied, which is really lovely. That we had a lovely experience. So in terms of what we know, a passive house can be comfortable, healthy, low energy, quite resilient. You know, they are all awesome things to strive for. But for us, we wanted to take it that step further in terms of that biophilic design, choice of materials, connection to nature, the views out, and being able to step out into those gardens. Water use as well, of course. And it's an all-electric home, and they have put the solar PVs on now. They didn't at first. They wanted to understand how big a system to put on. We did consider embodied energy where possible. As I said, no concrete and mainly timber, or the cladding being readily sawn timber, and then the recyclable metal that doesn't need any maintenance. And also for them, it was the adaptable, flexible use. So the 4 bedrooms don't have built-in robes. They can be used as a snug or a little sitting room, as guest rooms, as office. So they wanted that flexibility throughout the home. So really for us, it's this holistic approach. What else can we do beyond passive house? So yeah, this was an all-electric home as well, no gas connection. That's the solar heat pump, hot water, and the air conditioning unit, and the solar PV array now on the garage. And that biophilic design has extended out into the garden. They've got trying to increase the biodiversity and encourage local wildlife. They do have kangaroos come and visit from the nearby woods. They've got a billabong to try and increase that. So the garden's starting to take shape, which is lovely. And as I mentioned, for us, we know that being net zero carbon and Passivhaus is absolutely where we would love the whole industry to be, but we're now keen on and moving towards just doing less bad, and how can we do more good, and what might that look like in the future. So here's some of the other current Passivhaus projects that we're working on. Some are on site now, which is exciting, and others are still on the drawing board. But we've got a bunch of different things happening, including a multi-residential development. And we're only a small practice of, we've got 4 women at the moment, so we're quite small, but we're also in the process of hiring. So we can only do so much, which is why we're keen on sharing what we've learned so more people can do this as well. Quickly about these wall details, what we're finding with the number of projects we've been documenting is that we keep reinventing the wheel, and every single project has been slightly different. But I just wanted to illustrate this first option here is kind of our code wall, and sometimes this external cladding might be brick veneer quite commonly with an air gap here, but there's no airtight requirement, and this is how thin the walls are. And our friends who are up in Sydney and other milder parts of Australia, they can kind of get away with this same detail with no extra insulation, making it airtight and meet Passivhaus. And we know people who have done this sort of detail as well, whereas our project, some of them are moving right down the bottom here to 300 millimetre LVL stud framing, so a foot big, a foot wide, to get enough insulation in based on a particular project and its form and its volume and everything, and its climate. That's how much our wall needs to change. And we've also got a couple of projects where we're using straw bale prefabricated panels, again, to reduce that embodied energy, but much, much thicker walls. So it's a big jump from what sort of the standard is in Australia to different ways we can achieve Passivhaus. And we haven't gone down the path of CLT or SIPs yet. We're about to look into SIPs for a project, but really interesting that at the moment we haven't found one right way to do things, so we keep learning new ways. As I mentioned, the roof's easy to deal with, timber frame floor is easy, concrete slab, we're dealing with that a few different ways, whether it's insulated underneath, or some of our current projects have got structural slab, XPS insulation on top, and then a non-structural screed or topping slab. But for us, that's 2 concrete slabs, so we don't know that that's necessarily ideal either. All right, and almost wrapping up here, as Prudence mentioned, I am really keen on advocacy in the community, so I love these opportunities to share and promote Passivhaus to a wider audience, and I'm very involved with Architects Declare and helping spread that message. So for us, the awards were lovely, but that's not why we do what we do. It really is just giving us that platform to be able to talk more about Passivhaus. And that's also why I ended up on the board of the Australian Passivhaus Association. And last year we were involved with pulling together this book of Passivhaus in Australia, and I'll put the link in the chat there, because if you're interested to see all the other amazing things that are going on in Australia, this book has 25 or 30 of our case studies from the first certified projects, and I believe the current figure is 40 officially on the database, but we know that there is hundreds, talking to the certifiers, that are underway and in different stages, and also people choosing not to be certified as well. So yeah, there's a lot happening in Australia, and it's exciting to see where it's going to go.